was just after midnight, when the world felt thin and silence pressed in. I was behind the counter, counting out the register, when the overhead lights buzzed and flickered, once, twice, 3 times. The sound was sharp, unnatural. I froze, bills slipping from my fingers. Across the store, Marcus, the janitor who always whistled old jazz tunes and never seemed rattled, dropped his mop. The clatter echoed. His face went white. Without a word, he sprinted for the back exit, leaving his cart and jacket behind. I'd never seen Marcus run, not for alarms, not for burst pipes. This was different. He didn't look at me. He didn't look back. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The lights steadied, humming like nothing had happened, but the air felt wrong, charged, almost buzzing against my skin. If Marcus was scared, I knew I should be too. My eyes darted to the rules taped to the register. They'd always seemed like a joke. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. Never ignore the lights. But now, they felt like warnings. I should have paid closer attention. If I'd known what the lights meant, I would have run too. But I didn't. Not then. All I knew was that Marcus, the calmest guy on the night shift, had just abandoned his post without a word. And as I stared at the flickering bulbs overhead, I realized I was alone. The silence pressed in, heavy. Something had changed. I didn't know it yet, but the worst was still to come. And it started with a sound I'll never forget, a sound that still haunts me, because it meant I wasn't alone. And whatever was with me, it wasn't Marcus. My name is Jamie, and I never wanted the night shift. I took it because I needed the money. Rent was overdue, my car was one breakdown away from the junkyard, and my phone buzzed with reminders about bills I couldn't pay. I couldn't afford to lose this job, not now. The stop and go wasn't glamorous, but it was open all night, and they paid a little extra for the hours nobody else wanted. The store sat on the edge of town, a squat rectangle of flickering neon and glass, surrounded by empty parking spaces and the kind of darkness that swallows headlights whole. Most nights, the only company I had was the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional insomniac customer, truckers, shift workers, people who looked as tired as I felt. I'd only been here a week, but the routine was already settling in. Clock in at 10, count the register, restock the shelves, sweep the floor, and try not to think about how quiet it got after midnight. The manager, Mrs. Patel, was kind but strict. On my first night, she handed me a laminated sheet of rules, her eyes serious. "Follow these, and you'll be fine," she said. Some of the rules made sense. Lock the doors at 2 a.m. and check the cameras every hour. Others were just weird. Never ignore the lights. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. I'd laughed it off, thinking it was just a quirky way to scare the new hires. But after what happened with Marcus, the rules felt heavier, like a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. I could still see Marcus's face, white and wide-eyed, as he ran for the exit. The memory clung to me, making every silence feel like a warning. A sudden thump from the back room snapped me out of my thoughts. My heart jumped. I held my breath, listening, but the store settled back into its usual hum. My shoulders stayed tense, waiting for another sound. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint scrape, something shifting just out of sight. My hand hovered near the phone as I glanced toward the back, but the shadows only deepened. I told myself it was nothing. But here, nothing was ever just nothing. Not for long. I wasn't brave. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to make it through each shift, collect my paycheck, and keep my head above water. But the store had its own rhythm, its own secrets. And as I stood alone behind the counter, I realized that surviving the night meant more than just staying awake. It meant paying attention to the rules, to the lights, and to the things that moved in the shadows when you thought you were alone. On my first night, Mrs. Patel handed me a laminated sheet as soon as I clocked in. She didn't smile. "Read these. Memorize them. Don't skip any," she said, her voice low and serious. I took the sheet, expecting the usual safety tips. Instead, I found rules that made my skin crawl. Lock the doors at 2 a.m. sharp. Check the security cameras every hour on the hour. Never ignore the lights. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. If you hear knocking from the back room, don't answer. If the lights flicker 3 times, run. Don't ask why. Some made sense, at least on the surface. Locking up, checking cameras, those were normal. But the rest? I looked up at Mrs. Patel, searching her face for a hint of a joke. She just watched me, her eyes steady and tired. "You'll want to follow them," she said. "People who don't last long here." I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't join in. "What happens if I break one?" I asked, half mocking, half curious. She looked away, her voice dropping even lower. "You don't want to find out. Just trust me." For a moment, she seemed far away, like she was remembering something she'd rather forget. I tucked the sheet into my pocket, but the words burned in my mind. Never ignore the lights. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. If the lights flicker 3 times, run. The rules felt like a dare or a warning meant for someone else. I wanted to believe she was just superstitious. But after Marcus, I wasn't so sure. That night, every time the lights buzzed or the freezer door creaked, I found myself glancing at the rules. I didn't believe in curses or haunted stores, but I believed in fear. And the way Mrs. Patel looked at me, I started to wonder if the rules were the only thing standing between me and something I didn't want to meet. My first night alone, I tried to keep my mind busy. I wiped down the counters, restocked the gum and candy, and swept the floor twice, just for the sound of the bristles and the silence. The store was empty except for the hum of the coolers and the faint rattle of the air vent. Midnight came and went. I checked the cameras, locked the front doors, and told myself I was just being paranoid. But every time the lights buzzed overhead, I found my eyes drifting up, searching for that telltale flicker. Around 12:30, a customer wandered in, a man in a faded jacket, hood pulled low, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He didn't look at me as he moved through the aisles, just shuffled along, pausing now and then to pick up a can or a bag of chips before putting it back. I watched him on the monitors, trying not to stare. Something about the way he moved made my skin crawl, but I couldn't say why. He finally came to the counter with a single bottle of water. His eyes were shadowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're new," he said. I nodded, forcing a smile. "First week." He slid the water across, his fingers lingering on the counter. "You read the rules?" I hesitated, then nodded again. "Good," he said, and for a moment, I thought he might say more. Instead, he just turned and left, the bell above the door jangling in the silence. He paused at the door, as if listening for something, before stepping out into the dark. I tried to shake off the encounter, but the store felt colder after he left. I went to the back to check the freezer, remembering the rule about midnight. The door was closed, the lock secure, but as I turned away, I heard a faint tapping from inside. My breath fogged the metal as I listened. The tapping stopped. I waited, holding my breath, counting the seconds, but nothing happened. I told myself it was just the compressor, just the building settling. Back at the counter, I glanced at the rules again. Never ignore the lights. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. If the lights flicker 3 times, run. My hand hovered near the sheet, fingers brushing the edge. The lights above me buzzed, then flickered just once. I stared up, waiting for another. Nothing. The silence felt heavier than before. I finished my shift without another customer. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside, blinking in the pale light, and realized I'd been holding my breath for hours. I told myself I'd followed the rules, but as I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed me and was waiting for me to slip. The next few nights blurred together, each one a little stranger than the last. I tried to convince myself that the rules were just a weird tradition, a way to haze new hires or keep us on our toes. But the store didn't let me forget. Every shift, something small would go wrong. A register drawer that jammed, a cooler that rattled louder than usual, a shadow that seemed to move just out of sight. I started to dread the hours after midnight, when the world outside faded and the store felt like the only place left on earth. On Thursday, I worked with Carla, a college student who covered the early morning shift. She was sharp, quick with a joke, and never seemed fazed by anything. As we counted the register together, I caught her glancing at the rules taped behind the counter. "You actually believe any of that?" she asked, smirking. "Mrs. Patel acts like the place is haunted, but it's just old wiring and bad insulation." I wanted to agree, but the word stuck. "I don't know," I said. "Marcus ran out of here like he'd seen a ghost. And last night, I heard something tapping in the freezer." Carla rolled her eyes. "Probably a busted fan. Or a rat. You know how many places I've worked where the night shift rules are just made up to mess with people?" She laughed, but her eyes flicked to the rules again. That night, the store felt colder. The lights buzzed overhead, and I found myself watching them, waiting for that second or third flicker. I tried to distract myself by restocking the shelves, but every time I turned my back, I felt like something was watching me. At 1:15, the security monitor glitched, the screen filling with static before snapping back to normal. I checked the cameras. Nothing out of place. At least, nothing I could see yet. But I kept searching, certain something would. I texted Carla, half joking, half hoping for reassurance. "Have you ever seen anything weird on the cameras?" She replied with a shrug emoji and, "Just you jumping at shadows." I tried to laugh, but the unease wouldn't leave. At 2 a.m., I locked the doors, double-checking the bolts. The store was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something. I walked the aisles, flashlight in hand. The beam caught dust motes swirling in the air, but nothing else. The freezer door was closed, the back room empty, but the silence felt thick, like it was pressing in on me. I paused by the counter, staring at the rules. My reflection in the glass looked pale and tired. I wanted to believe Carla, to write it all off as nerves and bad lighting. But the memory of Marcus's face, the tapping in the freezer, the way Mrs. Patel's voice dropped when she talked about the rules, all of it gnawed at me. I started to wonder if the rules were more than just superstition. Maybe they were warnings, left behind by people who'd seen things they couldn't explain. Maybe the real danger wasn't believing in the rules, it was doubting them, just long enough to let something slip through. As the clock crept toward 3, I realized I was counting the minutes, waiting for the next sign, the next flicker, the next test. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what would happen if I failed. But I was starting to think I'd find out. The next night, the air in the store felt heavier, as if the darkness outside was pressing against the glass. I tried to keep busy, but every task felt mechanical, my mind replaying the rules over and over. At midnight, Carla showed up early for her shift, bundled in a hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She grinned, but her eyes darted to the rules taped behind the counter. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, dropping her bag by the register. "You still thinking about Marcus?" I shrugged, not trusting myself to answer. Carla rolled her eyes and grabbed the keys from the hook. "I'm going to grab a soda from the back. Want anything?" I almost said yes, just to keep her close, but the words caught in my throat. I watched as she disappeared into the back room, the door swinging shut behind her. A minute later, I heard the freezer door creak open. My stomach dropped. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. I hesitated, the rules echoing in my mind. Carla's laughter floated out, light and dismissive. "It's just a freezer, Jamie. You want a popsicle or something?" I forced myself to move, stepping into the back hallway. The air was colder here, the hum of the freezer louder than usual. I reached the door just as Carla stepped out, a soda in one hand and a popsicle in the other. She grinned, but her breath fogged in the air. "See? Nothing to worry about," she said, but her voice sounded thin. Behind her, the freezer door hung open, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move inside, a shadow, darker than the rest, shifting against the boxes. My skin prickled. I grabbed Carla's arm, pulling her away from the door. "Close it," I whispered. She rolled her eyes but slammed it shut, the sound echoing down the hall. We hurried back to the front, neither of us speaking. The rest of the shift dragged on. The lights flickered twice, then steadied. The air felt wrong, thick and cold, and every time I glanced at the freezer, I imagined that shadow growing, waiting. Carla tried to joke, but her laughter was brittle. She left early, mumbling something about a headache. After she was gone, I checked the cameras. The feed from the back room was static, the timestamp frozen at 12:03. No matter how far I rewound, the image stayed the same. A grainy shot of the open freezer door, a shape just out of focus, too tall and thin to be human. I locked up, heart pounding, and left the store without looking back. That night, I dreamed of the freezer, of cold air and shifting shadows, of something whispering my name from the darkness. When I woke up, I checked my phone. A message from Carla. "Did you see anything weird last night?" I can't stop thinking about it. I stared at the screen, the rules echoing in my mind. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. Never ignore the lights. If the lights flicker 3 times, run. And now, we'd both broken one. I just hoped it wasn't already too late for both of us. The next morning, sunlight poured through my bedroom window, warm and ordinary, as if the night before had never happened. I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs, kids waited for the school bus, and the world spun on like nothing was wrong. The hum of the refrigerator, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, these were the sounds of normal life, steady and safe. But inside, I couldn't shake the cold that had settled in my bones. I shivered, despite the morning sun. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the freezer door hanging open, the shadow shifting just out of sight, the static on the camera feed. Carla's brittle laughter, her breath fogging in the air, her message before dawn, all of it replayed in my mind. My hands tightened around the mug, soaking up its warmth, but it didn't reach the rest of me. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, just exhaustion, just superstition. Yet the store felt different now. The rules weren't just a list taped behind the counter. They were a line between the world I knew and something I didn't want to understand. At home, Everything made sense. At the stop and go, logic unraveled after midnight. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The air grew colder for no reason. The lights flickered, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. I thought about quitting, about calling Mrs. Patel and telling her I couldn't do it anymore. But I needed the job. I needed to know what was really happening. Most of all, I needed to believe that if I followed the rules, I might still be safe. But as I stared into my coffee, the line between normal and abnormal felt thinner than ever, and I wasn't sure which side I was standing on anymore. I was halfway through my next shift when Thomas showed up. He was the overnight delivery driver, older than most, with a thick gray beard and eyes that always seemed to be watching more than just the aisles. He usually unloaded crates in silence, but tonight he lingered by the counter as I rang up a customer. When the store emptied out, he leaned in, voice low. "You're Jamie, right? New nights." I nodded, wary. He glanced at the rules taped behind me and gave a small, knowing smile. "You've seen things, haven't you? Or felt them? Most people do, sooner or later." I hesitated, but something in his tone made me trust him. "What's really going on here?" I asked. Thomas looked around, making sure we were alone. "This place is old. Older than the store, older than the town. There's something about the land, thin, like the world's worn down to the threads. The rules aren't just for show. They're the only thing that keeps the night from getting in." He told me stories about employees who vanished, about nights when the lights flickered and the shadows moved on their own. "You ever wonder why the pay's better here?" he asked. "It's not for hours. It's for the risk." He tapped the rules with a calloused finger. "Break one, and you'll find out what's waiting." I've seen it happen. A chill ran down my spine, colder than the freezer itself. "What about the freezer?" I whispered. Thomas's face darkened. "That's one of the worst. Cold draws them. Makes it easier for things to slip through. If you hear anything from inside, don't answer. Don't even look." He straightened, grabbing his clipboard. "You're not alone, Jamie. If you ever need help, call me. But remember, no one can save you if you break the rules. Not always." He left me standing there, the store colder, the rules heavier than ever. For the first time, I wondered if they'd be enough. The hum of the freezer and the faint flicker of the lights followed him out, leaving me alone with the weight of his warning. The night it happened, the air in the store felt wrong from the start. The lights seemed dimmer, the hum of the coolers more erratic, and every time I glanced at the clock, the minutes crawled by slower than usual. Carla texted to say she'd be late. Her headache from the other night hadn't gone away. I told her to rest, but a knot of worry settled in my stomach. I was alone, and the rules felt heavier than ever. By midnight, the parking lot was empty. I tried to keep busy, but the silence pressed in. I checked the cameras, double-checked the locks, and kept my phone close. The rules echoed in my mind, each one a lifeline. I was determined not to break any of them. But sometimes, the night has other plans. At 12:17, the lights flickered once, then twice. I froze, heart pounding, waiting for the third. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath and tried to laugh at myself, but the sound died in my throat. I was restocking the shelves when I heard it, a faint, persistent knocking from the back room. It was soft at first, almost easy to ignore, but it grew louder, more insistent, until it echoed through the aisles. "Don't answer the knocking from the back room." I gripped the edge of the shelf, knuckles white. The knocking continued, rhythmic and relentless. I tried to drown it out by turning up the radio, but the sound cut through the music, sharp and demanding. My phone buzzed, a message from Carla. "Are you okay?" I had a nightmare. Don't break the rules. I stared at the screen, the knocking growing louder. I wanted to call Thomas to ask what to do, but I knew the answer. Don't answer. Don't even look. But the sound was impossible to ignore. It felt like it was inside my head, rattling my thoughts, making it hard to breathe. Finally, I snapped. I stormed down the hallway, every step fueled by fear and frustration. What do you want? I shouted, voice shaking. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. I stumbled back, heart racing. The door creaked open an inch, then another. Cold air spilled out, thick with the scent of something metallic and wrong. A shadow stretched across the floor, impossibly long, moving against the light. I couldn't move. My body felt rooted to the spot as the door opened wider. A hand, gray, thin, with too many joints, reached out, groping blindly. It brushed the wall, leaving a smear of frost. I gasped, stumbling backward, but the hand stopped, fingers twitching. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, 3 times. Run. I bolted, sprinting for the front of the store. The lights stuttered, plunging the aisles into darkness, then flaring back to life. I heard something moving behind me, scraping along the floor, whispering my name in a voice that sounded like Carla's, then my own, then something else entirely. I reached the counter, fumbling for the keys, but my hands were numb. The lights flickered again, and the shadow stretched closer, filling the aisle. I remembered Thomas's warning, no one can save you if you break the rules. Not always. I dove behind the counter, clutching the rules in my fist. The shadow stopped at the edge of the light, fingers curling around the corner. It hesitated, then slowly withdrew, retreating into the darkness. The light steadied. The cold faded. The knocking was gone. I lay there, shaking, the rules crumpled in my hand. I'd broken one. I'd almost broken another. The store was silent again, but I knew something had changed. The rules had protected me, barely. And now, whatever was on the other side knew my name. The rest of the night passed in a haze of dread. I kept the lights on, kept my back to the walls, and flinched at every sound. When dawn finally came, I left the store without looking back, but the sense of being watched followed me all the way home. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray, jointed hand reaching through the door, the shadows stretching across the floor, the lights flickering in warning. I told myself I'd survived, that the rules had held, but deep down I knew something had changed. The boundary was thinner now. I could feel it. The next night, Carla was back. She looked pale, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, but she insisted on working. "I can't stay home," she said. "I keep dreaming about the freezer, about something calling my name." I wanted to tell her to quit, to run, but I needed her there. I needed someone else who understood. We tried to act normal, but the tension was thick between us. We kept the radio low, checked the cameras every 15 minutes, and avoided the back room. The rules were no longer just a list, they were a shield, and we clung to them. Midnight came and went. The store was empty, the parking lot deserted. The air felt heavy, charged with static. At 1:03, the lights flickered once. Carla and I both froze. The hum of the coolers faltered, then steadied. We exchanged a glance, neither of us willing to say what we were thinking. At 1:17, the lights flickered again, twice this time, rapid and sharp. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath. Carla's hands shook as she gripped the counter. Then, at 1:33, the lights flickered 3 times. The store plunged into darkness. The silence was absolute, suffocating. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead. Carla's voice was a whisper in the dark. "Jamie, what do we do?" "The rules." I forced myself to remember. "If the lights flicker 3 times, run. Don't ask why." "Back room," I said, grabbing Carla's arm. "We have to get to the back room." 7 minutes. That's what Thomas said. We stumbled through the dark, guided by memory and the faint glow of the exit sign. Something moved in the aisles behind us, a scraping, slithering sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. We reached the back room and slammed the door shut, locking it behind us. I checked my watch. 1:35. "We wait 7 minutes," I said, voice shaking. "No matter what we hear, we don't open the door." The noises outside grew louder. Something pounded on the door, then scratched, then whispered our names in voices that weren't quite right. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the words still slipped through. "Let us in. It's cold out here. We're hungry." "Were you?" Carla sobbed, rocking back and forth, but I held her tight. 7 minutes, I repeated. Just 7 minutes. The temperature dropped further. Frost crept across the inside of the door. The lights in the back room flickered, but didn't go out. I stared at the rules, taped to the wall above the desk, mouthing them like a prayer. Lock the doors at 2 a.m. sharp. Check the cameras every hour. Never ignore the lights. Don't go into the freezer after midnight. If you hear knocking from the back room, don't answer. If the lights flicker 3 times, run. Don't ask why. The pounding stopped. The whispers faded. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a new sound, a low, guttural growl, rising from the floor itself. The shadows in the corners thickened, swirling like smoke. I squeezed Carla's hand. "Don't look at them," I whispered. "Don't answer. Don't move." The clock on my watch ticked slower, each second stretching into eternity. I counted my breaths, counted the rules, counted the minutes. At 1:42, the lights in the back room flared bright, then steadied. The cold receded. The shadows thinned. The growling stopped. I waited another minute, just to be sure. Then I unlocked the door. The store was empty. The air was still. The only sign anything had happened was a trail of frost leading from the back room to the freezer, and a single, gray fingerprint on the counter. Carla and I didn't speak. We finished the shift in silence, clinging to the rules like a lifeline. We'd survived the breach. But I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that the rules were the only thing holding the darkness at bay. And next time, we might not be so lucky. The morning after the breach, the world outside looked unchanged. Sunlight on the pavement, birds on the wires, people hurrying to work. But I felt different, hollowed out and raw. I moved through the motions of my day, but every sound seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. I kept replaying the night in my mind, the pounding on the door, the voices that weren't ours, the cold that seeped into my bones. I couldn't shake the memory of that gray fingerprint on the counter, proof that something had crossed over, even if only for a moment. Carla called in sick. I didn't blame her. When I texted to check in, she replied with a single word, "Nightmares." I understood. Sleep was a stranger to me, too. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadows swirling and heard the whispers promising they'd be back. I started double-checking every lock in my apartment, taping a copy of the rules to my fridge, as if they could protect me outside the store. At work, Mrs. Patel didn't ask questions. She just handed me the keys and a fresh sheet of rules, her eyes tired but kind. "You made it through," she said quietly. "That's more than most." I wanted to ask her how many others hadn't, but I was afraid of the answer. I noticed changes in myself. I was more careful, more alert. I watched the lights, listened for the smallest sounds, and never let my guard down. The rules weren't just a list anymore. They were a part of me, a shield I carried everywhere. I realized I'd grown, not braver, but more aware of the thin line between safety and the unknown. But there was loss, too. The store felt emptier, the nights longer. Carla never came back. I heard she transferred to a day shift at another location. I couldn't blame her. Some nights, I thought about quitting, about leaving the rules and the darkness behind. But I stayed. Maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of fear, or maybe because I needed to know that the rules still worked. I learned that survival wasn't about being fearless. It was about respecting the boundaries, listening to the warnings, and never underestimating what waits in the dark. The rules had saved me, but they'd also changed me. And as I locked up the store at dawn, I knew I'd never see the world the same way again. A week later, a new hire showed up for the night shift. Young, nervous, trying to hide it behind a shaky smile. I saw myself in him, the same uncertainty, the same hope that the stories were just stories. Mrs. Patel handed him the laminated sheet of rules, her voice gentle but firm. He glanced at them, then at me, searching for reassurance. I took him aside before my shift ended. "Read the rules," I said quietly. "All of them. Don't skip any. And if something feels wrong, trust your gut. The rules aren't a joke. They're the only thing that keeps you safe." He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I wanted to tell him everything, to warn him about the shadows, the cold, the voices that sound like people you love. But I knew he wouldn't believe me. Not yet. As I left, I paused at the door, looking back at the flickering lights and the new hire reading the rules for the first time. I wondered if he'd listen, if he'd survive his first breach, or if, one night soon, he'd hear the knocking and make the same mistake I did. The rules were all that stood between us and the dark was always waiting.